I will go ahead and get us started. As everyone else continues to join, we will welcome them with open arms. But good afternoon, welcome. So glad you guys are all here today, especially like Jean said on a Friday afternoon. We're very fortunate to be joined by two amazing practitioners from CDR Associates. Excuse me. They bring expertise in facilitation, stakeholder engagement, and collaborative planning. You'll hear from Jean Gatza, a senior associate and experienced planner and facilitator. Jean brings a strong background in conflict navigation, community engagement, and decision-making process design across a really wide range, from land use, policy issues, all sorts of different things. She's also a dedicated trainer with a passion for helping people build their skills they need to improve projects, strengthen relationships, and foster trust in their communities. She's joined by Laura Hickey, a program manager whose work focuses on designing inclusive community processes that lead to sustainable long-term outcomes. Laura has extensive experience supporting really complex efforts from public lands and water resources to multimodal transportation and is especially skilled at helping diverse stakeholders find common ground and navigate tough trade-offs. Together, these ladies will bring a thoughtful, people-centered approach to their work, one that really emphasizes understanding, transparency, and collaboration. Please join me in welcoming Laura and Jean.
Thank you so much, Abby. We are just so honored to be here today to talk with all of you. As some of I see many familiar faces here. As many of you know, I spent a couple of decades with the City of Boulder in long-range comprehensive planning, and then pivoted to consulting to be able to engage and work with lots of different communities across Colorado. And I'm so excited for you all to meet my colleague Laura. She brings so much insight and expertise to this work. We've got a lot for this little hour and a half, so we're going to try to get through pretty quickly to give you a little taste of a few tools that we use around collaboration and around conflict management. When I was preparing for this session, just looking at the APA website and our industry's articles, looking at that 2026 futures report, and our kind of state of the world, and the headline of embracing uncertainty is certainly appropriate for these times, and something where I think thinking about these skills of collaboration, understanding conflict, it's so aligned with how we navigate the uncertainty of our political environment, our communities, working organizations, all of those things. So while we don't have a silver bullet, what we're going to talk about today is hopefully will give you guys there are things that you know, but putting them as tools and frameworks can help really move through the discomfort and difficulty of conflict and collaboration. So with that, and Abby, thank you so much for your kind introductions. We're gonna talk about a lot quickly, but if you have questions, please, quick ones we'll try to answer along the way, but longer ones, please put them in the chat because we will track those and try to get to answering specific questions at the end. All right, so with that, as Abby mentioned, we're with CDR Associates. We work in facilitation and community engagement. We're a nonprofit that's been around for many, many years. We work in the built environment, natural resources, and resilience, community resilience, typically. Okay, Laura, let's go ahead and take a look at our learning outcomes today. So very quickly, we're going to be talking about collaboration and conflict. So some of those characteristics of conflict, explaining some of the barriers, some of the challenges, categorizing some conflict, and then really trying to get you to some solutions, some tools that are really applicable. By the end of today, there'll be things that you can do to think about the conflict that you are facing in your work. So what do we mean by collaboration? There's not one definition that's specific to what we're talking about today. But when we think of collaboration, we think of words like relationships, trust, vulnerability, maybe the honesty, compromise, some of those different pieces. I want you to think about what that means in terms of conflict. So take a moment, think about the processes, people, the projects, the stuff that wakes you up at 3 a.m. The stuff that once you wake up, you start spinning, and then you have to get up and do something because you can't let it go. What are those things? Some of those things, for me, in the work that I did, might have been maybe you're working on a redevelopment project. There are high hopes, there are high stakes, there are a lot of moving pieces, a lot of expectations. People want to get a lot out of it, a lot of competing interests that you have to manage. Maybe you're thinking about a project team that you manage. Maybe there are people that don't trust each other, that can't get themselves out of their positional stance. Maybe there are just really hard ways to get them to find common ground. Maybe that's what keeps you up. Maybe you've got that usual suspect community member that you're going to have to talk to on the phone or send an email to the next day or so about whatever process that you're in. They're suspicious. They don't trust you. They think it's a done deal. They're going to spread misinformation. How do you get them to believe in a process and to help build trust? If we open the chat, I am sure, oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. Disgruntled community members, delayed project timelines, competing interests, all of those things. Those are the things that kept me up at night. The things that helped me go back to sleep is having a framework or some tool to it. We're planners. We love criteria. We love frameworks. These are the things that are the foundation of our work. So what we're going to talk about are how we can use some tools to get through those. So again, what do we mean by collaboration? Who does it include? It can include anyone. Members of the public, individuals, different agencies, different departments, whoever you're working with, we can talk about with collaboration. Does everyone have to agree? Does collaboration mean we come to consensus? Not necessarily. It means that perhaps we work to build the relationship. Perhaps we can chip away at a better solution that meets more needs, even if it can't meet all needs. Maybe it means we can build more durable solutions, things that have buy-in for a longer course, but many times we can't actually get to complete consensus. Lots of different ways you can frame projects to address your decision making and your needs for those. Okay, and lastly on this, does community engagement count? Many of you are familiar with the IAP2 levels of engagement, where there's a specific level that we call collaborate. That's not totally what we're talking about today. We're talking about this in terms of really all the levels of engagement have some aspect of collaborative problem solving or collaborative approaches. Even if you're at an informed level, giving people information and bringing them along with a project is a collaborative process. So for today's purposes, we think about any engagement as being collaborative. So what are we doing today? we've been talking about what we mean by collaboration. We're going to talk about why it's important and kind of just broaden that thinking. Laura's going to talk a bit about types of conflict, helping us understand why we have challenges with each other some of the times, to be able to put it in a way of thinking to then get to solutions. We're going to introduce interests and positions, a foundation of interest-based problem solving, also introduce the triangle of satisfaction, which is how you can, again, categorize some of those interests to help you get to solutions and help you really listen and hear people and value and address what they're saying and getting to their specific interests. And then we'll talk a little bit about collaborative group structures, because there are so many different ways that you can structure a project or a process to help address your types of conflict, your participants' interests, and to try to work toward solutions, satisfaction, and all the other reasons why we collaborate. So with that, let's start with jumping into a quick poll about why we would collaborate. We'll open this up, and we've listed some of the reasons. Again, if there are things that you find missing here about what would be a reason why we would collaborate, go ahead and throw some of those in the chat too. But we think about, I mean, there's just 10. There are tons. Many times, our compelling reason to collaborate is around engaging the public or engaging other agencies, maybe for awareness, maybe to solicit feedback. Sometimes it's around options, generating alternatives, analyzing the alternatives, understanding what their pros and cons are or their unintended consequences. Sometimes it's just there's an issue, there's a problem, and we need to work together to find a path forward, or to better understand what's actually happening. Sometimes it's required. Sometimes some of you work with NEPA or other mandated processes, and a collaborative approach is required. Sometimes it's to get to some sort of agreement, an MOU, a development approval, maybe an agreed upon policy. Sometimes it's about buy-in. You just need to make sure there's more support for moving forward. And then sometimes it's around relationships, or just back to the core tenet that so many things need, is ensuring that people feel heard. Sometimes that's really the biggest thing we can accomplish through a collaborative approach. So let's see, did everybody pick?
Looks like we've got about 37 folks who have answered the poll.
Okay.
We'll give you another 15 seconds or so just to select a few here, and then we can share the results.
Looks pretty evenly split.
I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results here so everybody can see them.
Great. Yeah, everybody's like, yep. All the things are important reasons to collaborate.
I'll note the one that is kind of far and away is to address and resolve unforeseen problems. So really looking to collaborate for problem solving, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But a good spread around, trying to get to that understanding the issues of potential conflict, of where there may be differences in how people view possible solutions. But I like that, there's a lot about building productive working relationships, and there's just about soliciting views and feedback too as our top 3. So we have the range. As we know, as planners, these are such important factors in our work to be able to evaluate our projects, to develop policy, to make decisions, to help our decision makers, and to help our communities. So many of these different pieces. All right, well, cool. Thanks for participating on that. That's awesome. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Laura to talk more about conflict.
Yes. So one thing that can really help you in problem solving is being able to diagnose and address different types of conflict. So I'm going to walk you through a tool that we use called the Circle of Conflict. But before that, I'll give you an example of how I've used it in the past. So in a bike route planning project, the county was charged with identifying the preferred alternative for a bike path between two towns to get people out of cars and safely between towns. Their highest priority there was the safety of travel and looking to increase kind of multimodal options. So their charge to collaborate included to solicit views or feedback from the public on where they might want or prefer this route to be, to assess how well each of the routes were going to satisfy the different goals that they had in mind. So getting people out of cars, building the route itself, choosing an alternative that is constructible and implementable. And again, looking at that safety was really important to the county as well. They also were really anticipating that in future phases, like permitting, there would be specific public involvement requirements for the different permits. And so in the planning phase, wanted to start these conversations and collaborate early and often to set up that public involvement for success in the future. And that's what I think is so important about the planning phase, is that opportunity to build relationships, start conversations, understand the varieties of views, and really help shape the outcome and implementation of a project. So planners, you all have this really specific, important role of, and kind of key to making a project successful, in being able to identify possible hurdles or kind of keys to success, and making sure that you're thinking about so many different things and keeping projects successful through the different phases. So in the engagement and collaboration, there were three kind of interest groups that really appeared. Environmental groups who believed that the proposed route would disrupt wildlife in areas of high conservation value. Cyclist groups who believed that alternate on-street routes are not safe enough and won't get people out of their cars. They also had been asking for this for a long, long time. They wanted a bike path between these two towns. And there were also recreation groups who were interested in more than just bike use on this path, and so interested to understand how it could be designed in a way that could be inclusive and accessible for many different uses. With all these different views came up a few different kind of points of conflict. These are really different, sometimes opposed views. So the on-street routes didn't feel safe. The off-street routes felt like they would disrupt wildlife, and that was a lot to work through. And the county really valued both of those things, safety and wildlife conservation. And so we, early in this project, utilized the circle of conflict to identify how can we navigate this. So this circle of conflict is a way to name the types of conflict. There's often, it doesn't really matter what level. These could be interpersonal, they could be interorganizational, they could be communal. These different types of conflict kind of can appear at any level. It's good to acknowledge what level it's at, but again, helps us really name things. So the 5 central causes of conflict in our work often come down to value differences, organizational and structural constraints, data challenges, relationship problems, and political realities. Value differences are really those pieces where maybe the prioritization or mission of different organizations or individuals even are going to vary. That's usually a large source of conflict when it comes down to making a planning decision. Organizational and structural constraints are often around resources, the realities and the technical realities of your project, the regulations that you have to work within, and the decision making, who has that ultimate decision authority in your planning projects. Data challenges come up when there's too much data. It's so much to wade through, or too little data. It's actually not helpful in deciphering anything in the trade-offs. Or differing interpretations. So some may trust a certain source of data, and others may not trust that source of data and interpret it very differently from that. Relationship problems often come up from communication styles, personality types, baggage from the past. You're often running into the same colleagues, and you might have a harder time working on one project that carries into another project. There's also those political realities, which are those trends, those pet projects, their election cycles. Your decision makers might be really pushing for something, or there might be a trend within the community that really alters how your project is running. And so we want to launch another poll here to see which of these types of conflict do you encounter the most in your work? I'm gonna get that pulled up here, and I'm gonna keep this screen up so that you can take some time and look through the different types as as you're answering this question.
Laura, I think we should have had all of the above, because I suspect that
That's
that
fair.
there are many folks that may have difficulty picking out the top one.
Yes, we only gave you the option to select one, trying to do a little prioritization among the group here. I'll give you all a couple minutes to put down the sandwich during our lunch and learn. Click over to the poll.
And I think, and Laura, you could probably speak to this too. I think that there's a lot of times when folks may think that, oh, well, we have a value difference. It's really about our different mission. But in reality, it may be more of a relationship problem or even a data problem where we're relying on different information, there's different data that leads our decision making. Or perhaps there's, someone already in the chat mentioned, trying to do things within budget. Some of those kinds of compromises or challenges can show as one type of conflict, but when you dig deeper, it may be something different.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jean.
Or multiple.
And it may seem that if it's a value difference, you're never going to agree. But actually, underlying that value difference is the pressure of resources. So there's that organizational and structural constraint that you're looking to meet, and that being able to name that conflict of actually this values difference, it's related to resources and the kind of pressure and conflict that that's creating in the situation can really help work through it. All right, I'll give you all just 10 more seconds here to answer the poll. Got some really good participation on this one, and then we'll share the results.
Is it making you anxious to think about these, your different types of conflict? I look at these categories, I'm like, oh yeah, there's that one, and then there was that one, and there's that one. But hopefully when we can, by categorizing, we can try to think about those solutions a little differently.
Yeah. So sharing the results here, it looks like the type of conflict most encountered is differing values. Not totally surprising, as everyone brings a different perspective and viewpoint to the table when you're working collaboratively. It looks like political realities are also a large source of conflict because that's, again, kind of, I think those value differences in political realities often have kind of cascading effects on the other types of conflict as well. So totally hear, totally hear how those could be your most frequently encountered. And I saw a thank you for putting names to the conflicts.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I really do use this tool all the time. It's really helpful to us. And so want to take it a step further and tell you all how we use this tool not only to name conflict, but also to begin addressing conflict. So
Laura, if I might just, okay,
yeah,
I'd like to hear just a little bit more. I mean, with especially the differing values part, if people want to either put in the chat quickly or even raise hand, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what is it that you mean when you say differing values, and in that category of value differences. Anybody want to share a little what they're thinking? Okay, Eugene, I see your hand up.
Well, for those who might be in the Metro Denver area, case in point, Lakewood the citizens just rolled back zoning regulations that were worked on for about 3 years. And so planners and those of who might lean more towards density zoning, trying to encourage more options and opportunities for individuals versus those who have, one might argue, those that have been in the community for a really long time and are maybe a little apprehensive to change. So that is an example of differing values for sure.
Thanks, Eugene. Value differences can be, I mean, like change, perceptions of change and how to manage change is such a core of the types of conflict that we work in. Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah,
It
I see. Oh, go ahead.
looks like in the chat, generational values and cultural values are mentioned. Those are, I think that can really get into that relationship building aspect as well, knowing how people prefer to communicate, and how they are going to resonate with something because of generational values and because of cultural values is really important. Um, Looks like the next one is what different perspectives on what is actually going to improve the community for the better. So understanding what an improvement really means, the definition of that value. Everyone's sharing the value of making things better or improving, but what that actually looks like can be very, very different. Thanks for pausing me there,
No,
Jean.
I appreciate that. I think in value differences, to me, this comes up so many times also in our different agency or departments work. So, what we perceive as our primary mission. And sometimes that's really hard. And it ties back into these community values and how the community values show up differently. So great. Thank you. Thank you for letting me pause and try to understand that a little more.
Yeah. So we don't only want to leave you with ways to identify different types of conflict. We also want to get you into ways to address those different types of conflict because different conflict has different solutions. In the example I shared about this bike route planning, we knew there were really big value differences, which is something that it sounds like you all are encountering all the time. And something that we really wanted to do in this, is actually, I think all of the the uh, ways to address it that are listed here. So what we ended up doing in that project to overcome some value differences was gather a community working group that had different representatives from those environmental groups, from those cycling groups, from those varied recreation groups, and from the county as well. So we could all build a mutual understanding of each other. And in those conversations, in those meetings, we sought to identify common values. So although some of them seemed there were some diverging opinions, there was also a lot of area of overlap. Pretty much everyone in the room was really understood that safety of travel was really important. And everyone was overlapping and sharing those values of human safety and also wildlife safety. And many of the folks who had those recreational interests were interested in the wildlife in that route. And so they wanted them to be cared for and sustainable as well. In that example, we also had some data challenges. So the route that was proposed that was off street had a mismatch of different kind of land ownership. And so there was a lot of data on that wildlife and habitat surrounding the area, but not within the area. And that really made it difficult to understand and address those values of the wildlife risk and the habitat risk. But what we did do is that we were able to kind of identify next steps in future phases that would begin to answer those questions and influence the design of that bike route. The last thing I'll mention on that is that one, again, another kind of point of conflict was the organizational and structural constraints because there is a county and also 2 towns and varied land ownership along the way. We had a lot of players with a lot of different levels of decision making. And so we actually translated those different values that the safety, the habitat and environmental considerations, the use for multiple recreation opportunities, those different values turned into some evaluation criteria. So if you'll remember, the outcome of that planning process needed to be a preferred alternative. And so we took that organizational constraint and actually turned it into the answer. So we said, we have a lot of people with different values. We have a lot of people with different levels of decision making. Why don't we agree on the important considerations and then have everybody kind of assess those considerations together? And it really helped to name those conflicts early so that we could design a future collaborative process around the types of conflict we could anticipate.
Laura, with that project, did you come
Yes.
to total consensus? Did the group come to consensus?
There was a preferred alternative selected, and the group came to understand how it was selected, but not everybody agreed it was the best. What was the preferred alternative among most was not the preferred alternative among all. So there was
Did they get-
consensus and understanding, but
Uh-huh.
not necessarily total agreement in that way.
But would you say that they got to a place of I can live with it? Or did they get to a place of I at least understand everyone else's interests and can respect them?
I think a place of respect and I can live with it, but I'm curious for more data because the data challenges we honestly in the planning phase didn't totally overcome. And so part of the I can live with it was there will be more specific data to kind of surveyed and analyzed in the next phase.
Right. So it's such a great example of so many moving pieces, so many different aspects that have to be considered. And it's just one step in a planning approval process.
Yeah.
There.
So
Would you? Oh, sorry.
I
Would
was
you
just going to
say
say, I talked about values, the organizational, the data challenges. There's obviously those political realities, which is a big one for the group as well. Um, and I'm curious, so the ways that we have for addressing political realities here are getting or asking for political support, acknowledging the political realities and that there are politics involved in your project, and also educating politicians. I'm wondering if those seem like they're addressing the right political realities, because those can look really different. So if anybody had anything they wanted to add on what political realities look like in their work, we can talk a little bit about that as well. We have a minute here. You can raise your hand or put it in the chat.
when I see the educate politicians, I think it's also educating community members too, because there's so much, so many times a lack of understanding of who's the decider. Is it staff? Is it the planning board? Is it the planning commission? Is it the city council? What are the right criteria? What are the mandates? And so I think there's the education all around of political realities. What about others?
I'll just note Caitlin's response to Eugene's earlier example about the zoning, and Caitlin kind of reflecting and identifying that the zoning was more the result of relationship problems, particularly distrust of the city, made it hard to address misinformation, and much of the value differences were based on that misinformation, which also that sounds like a political reality to me as well. Um, so yeah, I think acknowledging the role of politics in the decision-making structure and educating both, Jean, to your point, communities about that kind of political structure and politicians on where the information is coming from.
Indeed, and respectfully, the relationship problems, history, distrust, and misinformation are those are things that keep us up at night, at least kept me up at night for sure, and are constant challenges.
Definitely. All right. Well, we want to keep building your toolbox of not only understanding or naming conflict and addressing it with a few different ways, but one key is definitely effectively communicating. And so Jean will introduce a tool to do that a little bit better.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And so so our tool number one, our circle of conflict, addressing types of conflict. Our next is to introduce positions and interests. This is a foundation for interest-based problem solving that is one of the biggest things that we use in our work in facilitation and in community engagement. And it's one of those things that you think, well, duh, but actually listening for the interest that people have can be so useful in getting us out of our defensive space, getting us out of coming up with our own justifications and responses, but really truly helping to understand the lay of the land and to make sure that people are feeling heard. So we think of a position. I think of position as when you put your hands on your hips, and this is my position. It is what I want. Whereas the interest is what's behind that position, is why do I want that? Why do I want what I want? So let's say, example here. It's lunchtime. I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That is what I want. Well, why do I want that peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Well, I'm hungry. I want to have lunch. And I want something, I don't have a refrigerator. I don't have a way to keep it cold. I need something that's not going to need to be refrigerated or heated up. I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Well, what are some solutions? Are there other solutions besides a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that helps me meet my criteria? I need something that's going to not make me, that's going to fill me up. And I need something that is easy to bring with me and not be refrigerated. Maybe I can have hummus and avocado. Maybe I can have cheese and an apple. Maybe I can take a little cooler. Maybe there are some other solutions for my lunch besides just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay, so position what I want. One solution, this solution. Sometimes it's what I don't want. Can't do that. That's impossible. But we think of position as what you want. Getting to the interest behind what you want helps broaden to different types of solutions. So Laura, let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. I just tried to advance it myself. Like, what? Okay, again, what I want. When I'm in a positional environment, those around me are opponents. There's only one right solution. I'm not conceding because that I'm not going to let down. I'm not going to lose any ground. The pie is limited. I need the biggest piece of the pie, or I need my solution, my way or the highway. But when you're in an interest-based process or thinking about interest-based problem solving, you need to look at all of the whys the participants want what they want. It's recognizing that our relationships are important. The needs of all the parties should be considered. We cooperate, we problem solve, and we look for other solutions. There may be a bigger range of how to satisfy the needs of those participating or the needs of the project. Okay, position is what you want. The interest is why you want it. All right, let's practice. Okay, if I say, you need to get moving to build that bike path before the kids get hurt riding on the street. What's the position? Position is build the bike path, right? Build it now. There's urgency. What do you want? I want the bike path. Why do they want it? To sit for safety. So it's protecting those that are riding on the street. Okay, that one was pretty easy. Let's try the next one. You're not running a legit process. We had to beg the mayor to get a seat at the table. All right, who can help me out here? What's the position? Well,
There's no public involvement.
There's not public involvement. Anybody else? What do they want? What do they want? They want public involvement?
Yeah, they want a voice.
Yeah, voice, seat at the table.
They want a seat at the table. They want a fair process. Their position is that they want a good process. They think this is a bad process. They want to be heard. Their position is that you're not trustworthy. But their interest, okay, let's switch. The position is they want a good process. Why? Why do they want to? I mean, you can extrapolate. It's one sentence. So perhaps they want that. They, you know, if they say they had to beg the mayor to get a seat at the table, maybe they want all of the affected parties to be able to be part of that process. Maybe that's what they want. Okay. I have kittens that don't understand that this is not the hour to come and play. Sorry, little interrupter there. Okay, so what they want a good process. They think this is a bad process. Why they want it? When you hear this, okay, there's a trust factor there. They need to trust this process. You can listen for the trust, and you can listen for, well, what is it? They want everyone to be able to be involved. Okay, let's go one more, and we can practice that one. Why are you hosting this meeting? You didn't use our feedback last time. Our views count for nothing. What's their position? What they want. What do
Their
they want?
views to be heard.
They want their views to be heard. Yeah. They don't want to waste their time, do they? They want to be there for a reason. They may not agree with the project, Jennifer, good point. But just thinking about this statement, they want to be useful. They want to be heard. They want to know that the meeting is really gonna result in listening and result in real feedback to the project. Okay. And yeah, so they want to be heard. They don't want to waste their time, and they want respect. We've, as I think Laura mentioned, there's a lot of history sometimes with community involvement with many processes, sometimes between agencies, sometimes with your agency or the community or within the community. The history can really make a difference. I think, as Caitlin mentioned, the distrust of community of an organization can be so hard to reestablish, and that can go back over a really long time frame. So listening to, being able to hear what it is that they're saying, to be able to put a definition to what are those feelings there? What is that need for respect that then that if you can help convey, can help break down that sense of that this is my position. This is that I can move from my position, that I can be more open to thinking about maybe this is a legitimate process. Maybe they are listening. Maybe it will be different this time. But you have to be able to express that you've heard what their interest is beyond just what their position is. Does that make sense? Making sense to folks? Okay, Laura, anything else to add on that?
I'll just add that,
Thoughts on any of those examples?
I mean, a position is typically how someone is speaking. That is totally traditional communication, positional communication. You tell people what you want, you tell people what you're thinking, and as someone involved in the planning team or a facilitator of a planning process, we really try to dig into that why, because that's kind of the magic. It's the thing that we can translate into our processes and into our trade-offs. So I can provide an example from that same kind of bike route planning. I was at a public meeting, a community member told me, you cannot go with option B because at this intersection, there's way too much traffic. The cars are speeding by. The traffic congestion is building. If you add a bike lane passing through there, there's going to be even more congestion. And so their position was clear. Don't choose that option. I couldn't necessarily work with that information as part of the project team, but I was able to understand from their comments. They said, don't put it there. And they gave me their why. They said, because it would cause more traffic congestion, because cars are already speeding and it would actually be unsafe for bikes to be there. And so that's really kind of that transition of hearing this is what they want, but why they want it is actually kind of the good stuff that can really help you. Because often what one person wants, the next person might want the exact opposite. So the next community member could say, you have to choose option B because it's the only one that makes sense. And my question would be, why does that one make sense to you? And tell me more about that to get to those interests. So it's really kind of like a way to think about communication. And I think the biggest thing is not expecting the public to communicate in this way, but knowing that you're communicating in this way, that you want to understand interests and get past the positions that you're hearing.
Exactly. Great. Okay, so why then? Let's talk with this, and then Laura, you can go ahead and jump in a
Okay.
little bit more about thinking about positions and interests. So especially understand, especially trying to then think of how do we recognize, how do we find that nugget, that core piece of what that interest is.
Mhm.
Laura will introduce the triangle of satisfaction that
Yes.
helps us then think about this a little bit more.
Yeah. So again, we didn't have to necessarily, uh, we didn't have to necessarily define what conflict was before giving you a tool to name the different kinds of conflict. But Jean wanted to identify interests here before we name some different kinds of interests. So another kind of framework to name the things you're hearing. Um, so there are multiple kinds of interests, and often you have your substantive, procedural, and psychological. Let's walk through each of those. Substantive interests, those are the desires or needs that are related to tangible outcomes or results. Procedural interests include transparency, having sufficient data or information, adherence to protocol, and psychological interests include feeling heard and trusted and respected. Oftentimes, people have all these types of interests when they are collaborating. They have an interest in the tangible outcome, they have an interest in feeling heard and respected through the process, and an interest in understanding what that process is. And so I'm going to use an example because I think it illustrates these tools and techniques uh, better than just explaining what they are. But we had a working group once where at the first meeting, one of the working group members stood up and was pretty upset. They were upset because they couldn't believe that they didn't see some representatives from a few different organizations in the room. They said, if you're going to be doing a land use planning project here, you definitely need to be including these three different like community-based organizations. I can't believe they're not in this room, in this working group with us. And we heard that loud and clear. And the next steps we took included inviting those three organizations that were suggested to the group. And in those invitations, they were email invitations to some contacts in the group. We CC'd that task force member or the working group member that had brought up that concern. And it ended up that each of the organizations suggested said, thanks for asking, we're not interested, or thanks for asking, we don't have the time right now. And at the next working group meeting, that same individual who had major concerns about the process actually really turned around as a champion for the process. He spoke up and he said, hey, I want to acknowledge that last time I really called out the project team for what I thought was a mistake. And I appreciate that they did the work to invite those three organizations that I see as important to this conversation. Substantively, the tangible outcome or result was that none of the organizations that individual wanted in the room joined. But procedurally, we built transparency by including them in those invites so that CC goes a long way in communications. And psychologically, he clearly felt very heard, trusted, respected when we acted on those suggestions. And so that example really illustrates that when individuals you're working with and collaborating with understand the process and feel heard along the way, there's a lot more flexibility typically with what the tangible outcome can be. which helps a lot in these areas where we have so many different values, we have so many different perspectives, we have different ideas about what improvement is. That tangible outcome of improvement might not look the way somebody wants it to, but if they've been brought along in the process, they understood how that decision was made, and they felt heard along the way. They see how their values were reflected, or at least feel considered, that those procedural and psychological interests can be met and make those substantive interests kind of more flexible.
Indeed.
I have a question here in the chat, which I think we have some time to answer, Jean, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. How would you manage that situation where there's a limited budget and inviting additional stakeholders would add cost that isn't there? That is a great question. So
That's a great question, Nikki. Yeah, in that example, I always start to be like, oh, but I don't know if we may not have the permission to add additional people. In that situation, we did. But
yeah.
Laura, go ahead.
Well, I would just say, I think there's still ways. This is one example where that was a possibility. That was an outcome that was possible to invite more people to the group. I think building the transparency and honesty of these are the factors that limited how we recruited the members of the working group. Maybe you're supplying different stipends or something like that if you have some sort of incentive for community involvement. I think that is still building procedural transparency and hearing them that they said these are important voices to include. But just that step of kind of building that transparency, hearing what they're saying, can help build that buy-in in the process of decision making. Jean, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think that by for that particular example, by being on the task force may not be the only way for engagement.
Yeah.
It may they're and we'll talk about this a little bit in collaborative structures. Sometimes a really big group doesn't help you. Sometimes it's really purposeful to have a small group that is certain defined interests that are represented in a working group situation, but that doesn't mean that you don't do other types of engagement to hear the concerns or the viewpoints of others. And you can be, as Laura said, you can be really transparent about that. I think it's one of those you have to back up to what is your purpose of engagement? What are you trying to get? How does it impact the decision making? Who's the decision maker? So, thinking about all of those different factors. And budget is a big one. Budget and time, when we talk about community engagement, those are big factors besides what is it that you're trying to learn from community members or share with community members. Does that help, Nikki? Yeah. Oh, okay. We got a thumbs up. Yay.
Great.
So Laura, there's something else I was going to ask you about. The threes of these. It's gone. Okay. You can.
Well, I think you had a good segue to our next slide here, where these types of interests can also map onto what brings you to engagement or what brings you to collaboration. And
to that point, let's stay right there just for a second. I remembered.
Okay.
When we're thinking about a situation, a process, a community process, or a decision-making process, thinking about interests in these ways, sometimes we will actually create the analysis, make the table. Who's involved? What's their interest? Thinking about it, is it substantive? Is it procedural? Is it psychological? Is it a mix? Is it all those? Really trying to map interests for a project helps inform what your solutions are, whether you do some sort of group or structure or process, or it just informs your engagement plan in general. So I think it's thinking about interests in this way and mapping them. Doesn't have to be a super long process, but it can be a really helpful one to then help you see what is it that you need to be able to help move people along.
Definitely.
Okay, and so then with that, then we can talk about some of the structures that we think about. Okay, so these are just a few, and I see several colleagues from Lakewood here. We were fortunate to be able to facilitate some advisory groups with them for their comp plan update last year. And that was one really key aspect of community engagement for their process. And I think helps get to Caitlin, your point and Eugene's point about building trust. We saw a lot of trust built with the community members that participated in those groups because they could see in action the staff members listening and actually getting that feedback into the final product and into the new goals and policies, and they weren't policy goals and strategies for the plan. But it really depends on what your project is, who your players are, who's making decisions, what those elements of conflict are, what the constraints are. You have the whole range from community forums, task forces that can be appointed or applications made to be appointed to them. Sometimes there are steering committees. Sometimes you have standing advisory councils. Sometimes there are coalitions that are agencies or groups that have come together over a long period of time. So many different types of structures and needs that fit your different the different working relationships, the different needs. I think some of the things to really think about on these is back to your, why are you engaging? Why are you meeting? What are the purposes? Who the decision makers are? What is it that these groups may need to help that decision making? Sometimes they're truly advisory. It's providing different kinds of input. Sometimes you'll clarify a majority opinion or maybe a minority opinion just to make sure that those viewpoints are recorded. Sometimes, as Laura said, there'll be a preferred alternative that gets moved along. Sometimes the decision making is truly of a, we're going to do what the group says. We're going to implement the solution that they come up with. Sometimes it's small advice. There's coalitions that you have that span over time, and there are different milestones. They work on this, and you work on that, and then you make recommendations on the next thing. So I think that's some of the really key things to think about when trying to choose or trying to form any kind of group structure is, who's a decider? What's your time frame? How, going back to some of those, categorizing the interests, what's the history? What's the need for the relationships? What are some examples of things that have worked well that people already know, that they know how to do, they could maybe have the levels of trust to do? And then plan for the care and feeding. These types of things just don't happen on their own. They don't continue on their own. You really need to plan for the time, the resources, clarify the roles, clear structures. If you have a community working group coming together that expects that they're making a recommendation and that they have to agree on something, that is a whole different thing than we get to all have our viewpoints recorded, and we're all going to be heard. And we don't necessarily have to come to an agreement. But those things have to be established in the beginning so people can maintain trust in that transparency of process. Laura, what other things that we would want to add or to think about around collaborative group structures?
I think I'll just emphasize the point that these different structures can meet different interests, and also kind of help accommodate different types of conflict. So if you are in a situation, for example, where there's a lot of distrust, that's where a community working group can really come in. And not only are they potentially working on the substance of the project, so maybe giving their explicit impact, input, or feedback on the outcomes, but they can also provide feedback on the process of how you're engaging other individuals. And so just think about if there's a lot of distrust, that's kind of a lack of meeting psychological interest, probably. There's that group or community, for whatever reason, may not be feeling heard or hasn't been heard in the past. And something you can do is bring them in through a certain structure like a working group. Whether that is suited for a steering committee, it's a different question. Steering committee has like the different kind of decision authority than a working group might. So those are the things to consider, I think, is how can these structures help you build trust, build relationships, meet the different interests that folks have, different types of interests that folks have within their level of decision-making authority.
So I jumped ahead into collaborative structures before we circled back to the results of our first poll and thinking about those in terms of the triangle of satisfaction. So maybe let's pull that back up.
Sure.
And think back to those reasons at the beginning of the session. We talked about why do we collaborate, and thinking about those top ones: to solicit views or feedback, to address and resolve unforeseen problems, and to build productive working relationships. Do folks see how those pieces fit into these different categories of interests? Anybody want to add any observations or thoughts about that?
I guess I'll add the observation that oftentimes, so the most selected option was something along the lines of
addressing and resolving the unforeseen problems.
Yeah, was the addressing and resolving unforeseen problems. A lot of the other top ones were, solicit views or feedback, really getting to the substantive, but it can be hard to get to the substantive or have open-mindedness about those substantive outcomes that you need, that brings you to the table as a collaborator, without meeting one of the other top answers, building productive working relationships. You really need to build that psychological understanding, feeling heard, respected, and oftentimes that can also relate closely to the procedural piece. You're going to be heard through this certain channel. We're going to do a survey to help understand how to make a decision. And that's how we're going to hear you. And this is how it connects to the decision. You're building that, meeting those procedural interests to help build buy-in through the whole process. So I would just say none of these interests are existing in isolation. You're always going to kind of encounter these different ones. And we often say people have different lengths to each side of the triangle. So somebody might have really high procedural interests. I am a person who has really high procedural interests. I want to understand what we're doing now and how it relates to what we're doing later. And and others really need that space to feel heard and to build the trust. And so those are
And
just
and
things to
others may
consider.
just be about the outcome.
Yes, a lot of people may just be about the outcome too.
All right. Well, oh, Eugene, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question, and I know it's probably topical given the special election that occurred this week, but what advice would you offer those of us out here, in the trenches, on the front lines, where we set up these processes? We are all focused on genuine collaboration for all the things that you've covered today, but
Hmm.
I just worry that in today's political environment that there are folks that are joining the conversation, but they're not necessarily there with the best of intentions, and they're really there to either get their way or to stop the process if they're not going to get their way. So recognizing that that's a thing that is true out there, at least in some cases.
For sure.
What advice would you give to all of us who really are trying to do this with genuine, I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any thoughts?
I can jump in, Laura,
Hmm.
because this is a huge thing. And I think as a professional that spends a lot of time with the community, we face that. The thing that these kinds of tools for me and a great engagement plan helps me work with integrity so that I know when those forces are at play, and there will be attacks on the process, there'll be attacks on individuals, there'll be attacks on decisions, that knowing that you're working with integrity and Eugene, as you say, with the right intentions to be able to serve the community, that documentation, helping your decision makers do the same thing, knowing what that process is, knowing what those milestones and those engagement pieces are, and challenging them to actually know that they're going to be getting community feedback and knowing what they're going to do with it. Like for us, when we work with communities, we want to really know that it's not just a check the box, that they're going to use the feedback and the process that people are going to put their time and energy into. And I think for you all as planners, it's so important to be able to represent your decision makers legitimately and honestly, that that they're going to be able to, if they're engaging folks, that they're going to use that feedback. So to me, I think it comes back to having your plans, your engagement plans, your process plans in place that are transparent and reflect the integrity of the work that you're doing. Laura, more to add?
Yeah, this reminds me of I don't know, an adage we kind of lean on, that 10% of any room is going to be always with you, and 10% of any room or group is going to be always against you. And really, we're looking for that dialogue with the 80% in between to apply some of these practices. So I guess that's just to say there will be people certainly that come with those substantive interests that are with you or against you. And there's also a large set of people usually that kind of outweigh the positional based negotiation, willing to have that conversation of how can I be involved? How can I provide my feedback? How can you hear me? And how can I hear you and learn more about the process too?
Yeah. And especially if we can, because maybe at the beginning, it's more like 30% and 30%. But if we can
Hmm.
move some of the folks to the middle of, okay, I'm listening. Maybe I'll listen. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe I'll listen to what somebody else has to say too and think about it. That I think that's progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Good question. So, to kind of wrap things up of some of the things that we've talked about, we've gone through 3 different tools. We've gone through types of conflict, so categorizing of conflict. We've gone through interests and positions, really looking for what's the nugget in what's the why in people's positions, and then thinking about what type of interest is that? Is that a substantive interest? Is it a procedural interest? Is it a psychological interest? Some of the tools to be able to map out your processes, your decisions, your conflict, to be able to then think about what's the right collaborative problem solving approach to be able to apply to it. Some of the overarching best practices, taking that collaborative and cooperative mindset. It's not just these pieces of the pie. Perhaps the pie can get bigger. Perhaps the solutions can be expanded outside of people's set positions. Taking the long view, thinking about relationships, building that trust, being authentic, working with integrity, and then budgeting for it. Thinking about and budgeting not only resources, but time. These kinds of thinking about collaborative approaches takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy, and usually takes a lot of resources. So what are some other best practices that you would suggest, given what we've talked about? Anyone have some others?
I think in addition to being authentic is staying curious. That's it's easy, especially as you spend more and more time in this world, to maybe assume or expect a certain kind of why behind someone's what. So just staying curious and really trying to understand the interest, but behind every position, as if it's an entirely unique position you've never heard before.
One thing I think is helpful, and this isn't really rocket science, but going to the community, going and being in community with people versus expecting them to come to our places, it can help sort of level set the playing field.
For sure.
Absolutely.
For sure, when you're talking about for sure with community members, but then when you think of that, that could be any kind of interest-based, interested parties that you're working with, going to other agencies, going to other departments, going to seeking out those, thinking ahead about who might be interested or impacted. Being anticipatory. Good point, Eugene. Anyone else want to jump in on any other best practices or things that maybe were ahas in some of this presentation as you were thinking about your processes?
In the chat, someone shared, as a technical expert, we so often forget to open engagement discussions with the why and what level of engagement we're looking for to set expectations. So a good reminder to set those expectations at the beginning of meetings.
For sure. Sometimes one of the other best practices we think about is starting small. Look for small wins, take small bites, take small steps, build on relationships. Sometimes that's not totally possible. Okay, I see John's got a comment: to scale projects to give wins to as many parties as possible. Something you do in the transportation world. Absolutely. Trying to meet a lot of different needs, a lot of different interests. And as you say, what are the wins, even if they're small? I think that goes a long way to acknowledging people's whys, acknowledging their interests, and documenting them. So many times we do this, but then we don't share that back out in ways that people then know that they've been heard. It's really important, John. Thank you. All right, were there any other overall questions? Anything else that is kind of making you go, not really sure? What else? Well, we can go ahead and wrap up. Laura, I think we have one more slide. As we mentioned, this was just a little over an hour of very fast, rapid fire practice with these tools. CDR is hosting a facilitation, engagement, and collaboration in environmental conflicts coming up in a month in May. And if you're interested in this and want to deepen these skills, be able to really do a deep dive into different techniques, different approaches, practice, application to your particular types of challenges. It's a very engaging 3 days, and you get to knock out 17 AICP credits with very, very useful information. Laura, more to add on FEC?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that we really lightly touched on some things. We know this was a lunch and learn, and so lots of people listening in. But this training opportunity is 3 days to really practice using these tools. We have different scenarios and examples that you can kind of role play through and practice being a facilitator and practice your conflict resolution. And it's great to really learn from each other as well. So an opportunity to meet with other folks who might be in similar fields and positions to just understand how they navigate this challenging environment and rewarding environment too, I'll say.
Thank you so much, ladies. As a reminder, I will be sharing these slides on behalf of Jean and Laura. And then in that, we will also have their contact info. So if anybody has any questions that you think of after the fact, feel free to reach out. And thank you again for joining. Thank you for the presentation. That was amazing.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you to APA Colorado for hosting and giving us an opportunity to meet with all of you and share a little bit. We hope this was helpful. I know for me, like really the tools to be able to not wake up in the middle of the night and spin about these problems. We hope that these are things that will be useful.
I agree. Have a good rest of your Friday, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.